Welcome back to another episode of If I Were the Committee, starring yours truly, Darius Brockett. I have a familiar face on with the show, Anthony McBarnette. You heard him when I first debuted the episode for episode one, when there wasn't a lot of chaos. So now there's chaos, and I had to bring him back. Uh, for those who don't know, we work together. Also, the rankings dropped on Tuesday night. Uh, if you are under a rock and you haven't seen all the controversy and all the if you haven't seen any of the outlandish statements by coaches and players and fans and backlash, I don't think you would know what happened. So, AMAC, before I bring you on, let's recap our list for the people who weren't here or were not listening. So, number one, we have Oregon. Number two, Texas. Penn State comes in at number three. Notre Dame bumps up to four. Georgia five. Ohio State, for losing to Michigan, drops to six. Tennessee goes to seven. SMU jumps from nine to eight. Indiana goes to nine. Boise State is your group of five champion 10. And here's where it gets dicey. Alabama at 11, Miami at 12. And for the sake of the last three spots that matter, and not spots in the playoffs, but for the last three ranking spots that matter, Ole Miss at 13, South Carolina 14, Arizona State 15. So for those who don't know how the seeding works, five conference champions, five best or highest ranked conference champions are in. So based off that, we are presumed, and what we saw in the seedings, Oregon had the top spot, Texas had the number two spot, SMU has the three spot, Boise State has the four spot, and Arizona State would come in as your Big 12 champion, and they would get the number 12 slot, which means there are a bunch of at-large bids. AMAC, I'm gonna start with you again.
Mhm.
Welcome to the show. What was
Mhm.
your first initial thoughts of the ranking system? What was your first reaction when you saw it?
Um, I think, well, first of all, thank you for having me. Um, I think that it was kind of like a combination of things that were going on. First, we saw obviously everyone politicking on like Monday, like give us our spot, give us our spot, like type of politicking. We saw Lane Kiffin do it. Kalen DeBoer had a couple of spots on like ESPN talking about why his uh, team should be on there. Mario Cristobal for Miami, right?
Yep.
Um, he was also politicking, and then we
Shane Beamer
saw,
had his moment.
yeah, yeah. I mean, which is like, okay, Shane,
Everyone
relax.
got a politic for something, you know?
Yeah,
You got to
yeah,
have something to believe in.
yeah, and it's just like, and I understand it because at the end of the day, especially when we're talking about those at-large bids, they're not those guaranteed spots like the conference championship. There's not like a level of objectivity that you have with those at-large bids. It's all subjective. You know, we try to kind of keep it, um, we trying to keep it like as concise and make
No, no,
as
they
much.
don't.
They try.
Don't,
They
don't,
try.
don't, don't bring that bullshit over here. No, they don't. No, they don't.
Yeah,
We've heard Ward Manual week in, week out have one argument for one team that does not favor the other. Matter of fact, SMU for the prime example.
yes,
Your
and that
their
I think
argument.
that's my. I really don't want to see a world like when they asked him about the SMU Alabama, that specific scenario with SMU, the way they've been playing, and their one loss to a BYU team who everyone looked at as the favorite in the Big 12 for the longest time. If they happen to play a close game with Clemson and lose that game, it's hard for me to keep them out of the playoff, especially especially over an Alabama team with a terrible loss to Oklahoma and a Vanderbilt loss. Now, when it comes to Alabama specifically, we've had these conversations around work before where it was like, okay, Vanderbilt, that was okay. I'll give that to you because I'll give you a slip up. Basically, you beat Georgia, so I feel like you're still in that upper echelon of team. Then they lose to Tennessee, and I'm like,
Okay.
all right, now you're playing games, but if you win out, you're good, damn. And then not only do you lose to Oklahoma, that game you look like you didn't belong in anyone's top 25, let alone in a college football playoff scenario. So, with that being said, specifically with SMU and Alabama, I have a hard time seeing SMU losing that Clemson game again, especially if it's close, um, and falling behind Alabama and missing the playoff. Now, if it's a blowout, if SMU goes on that field and gets dog walked by Clemson, then I may be more understanding of it. May not want to let that point go of SMU not making it, but I may be a little bit more understanding of it.
Okay, so for everyone who may not know what he's talking about, Ward Manuel, the committee chairman, was asked point blank period, hey, if Alabama, I mean, it was about the ACC championship game between Clemson and SMU. His first initial statement was everyone in the conference championship will have merit. And that was what, 2 weeks ago, AMAC? It was like
Yeah,
playing in the conference championship game gives you a little bit of merit. Then
yeah,
we get to Tuesday where he specifically asks about SMU. If they lose, does Alabama jump them? He says, yeah. He said there's a possibility. But
yeah.
then he also
Possibility.
runs back around the table and goes, well, if they win, there's a possibility they get bumped up a couple spots.
Yeah.
Now, it's hard to believe him say that. It's hard to believe him say that. And I want to stick with this conversation specifically about Alabama. You mentioned it. 9-3, they were allowed one slip up, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
think they were allowed one slip up. I think most of us were assuming Georgia or like maybe Tennessee would have been like your one slip up you're allowed to have.
Mm-hmm.
But they lost to a unranked Vanderbilt.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the committee, AMAC, let's emphasize that part,
Mm-hmm.
said they value how the game is played on the field. Well, if we watch that game, Vanderbilt pretty much handled Alabama. Don't let the score fool you. It
Yeah.
said 40 to 35. They handled them.
Yeah.
Tennessee handled Alabama. Don't let the score fool you and make you think it was a 7 point game where on the field it was pretty much Josh Heupel let off the brakes just a tad after the second half when like they realized they were up.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's not even an excuse for losing to a now 8-3 or what? I mean, not 8-3, but what 6-6 Oklahoma team?
Yeah, and just to interrupt you on that point, just 1 second. I think it's who they lost to too, because Alabama's defense looks sus in all of those losses, including that that win against Georgia. To let Georgia come back in that game, you a Vanderbilt offense that struggled and an Oklahoma offense that might as well not even exist. I think that's also like noteworthy.
I agree, but we talk about defenses, and I want to stay there because then that leads us to the flip side of the ACC, Miami. Everybody in this round of the committee seem to talk about how good a team plays, how good a team plays, the defenses, the defenses, the defenses. Miami's defense has not been that great this year.
Mm,
However, it's still a top 25 defense by numbers alone. I'm not saying when you watch the film, it's a completely different story,
uh,
but on average, it's a top 25 defense.
yeah.
Alabama's in the bottom 50. Alabama's defense has been suspect. Miami's defense has been suspect. But the biggest problem of it all was Alabama, who loses to Oklahoma but beats Auburn and played Mercer
Mm,
for a SEC conference schedule that is a little bit different than the ACC. ACC has 8 games, SEC has 7.
mm. What
They're
SEC? I thought SEC had eight. Does SEC not have eight too?
No, SEC does not have 8. That's why they get to have that extra Mercer game.
Okay.
That's why
So
there's that
so
extra
Big Ten is the
non-con.
only one with nine. Okay. Big Ten are only big
Big Ten
ones.
is the
Yeah.
only one with 9.
Yeah.
ACC jumps to 9 next year, and
Hmm.
there's a conversation about the SEC bumping theirs up.
Okay.
But that's why you see that free W that comes in where we talk about the SEC scheduling and that extra cupcake game they always play.
Yes.
So they get that win. That's an important win. And I think that's an important win because my assumption is if they play another conference game, I think they go 8-4, maybe not 9-3. But Miami, who's lost both their games by 5 points or less, seem to take more of a fallout. And I'm going to ask you this, and then I'm going
Mhm.
to get in my rant because I have to. And I
Yeah.
will even leave the fandom aside when I get into this rant because I just said the defense was terrible. But what
Yeah.
was your first thought process of seeing 9-3 over 10-2?
Yeah. So here's my thing when it comes to the Miami versus Bama debate. It exhausts me because I feel like both of those teams just don't have. If you ask me to favor one or the other, I would probably go with Miami, but it's not by much. And the reason being is because Miami has played inferior teams super close throughout their whole year. Now, to give Miami their favor, their losses aren't as bad as Bama's loss. Syracuse is a good team. Georgia Tech, I think their record, although it's not that good, they shown they can go on the
Took
field with
Georgia to 8
anyone.
overtimes.
Exactly. They showed they can go on the field with anyone and and hold their own. So
Syracuse a
Miami
9-win team.
and Syracuse has looked decent or better than decent. Syracuse has looked good for the has looked good all year. So to your point, Miami's losses aren't as bad as Bama's loss. That went again reiterating that Vandy loss and that Oklahoma loss are two terrible losses. I think the only thing that helps them is they have a win against Georgia and they dog walk LSU, whereas Miami, all their wins have been nail biters, even over inferior teams
We
like a
can't say
Virginia Tech.
all. We can't say all. I think when we
Most,
say all, we remember mainly Virginia Tech and Kyle, and then I'll say Louisville because Duke is 53-31. Pretty much they get a garbage touchdown after it, but after a while, Miami puts it together. They
mm-hmm,
beat Florida State single-handedly very easily,
mm-hmm,
and then they beat Wake Forest very easily.
yeah,
So you can't. Let's not forget they played Florida, the SEC.
yeah.
So
That win, I think it was looked at as that like when it first happened because we all coming into the season had our questions about Florida. Florida has come on as of late, so
they have.
that win also is good for Miami. But if you look at their schedule,
They're
you
just
can
not top 25 wins.
yeah, there's no Georgia signature, and I say that Georgia's looks sus this year too. Like, and I think this is going into your SEC bias. Yes, there is clearly an SEC bias, but I don't
Greg
think my
Sankey.
I don't think Miami is that team I'd be arguing for. I think it would be SMU if they do lose.
You want to know why I'm arguing for Miami? At least in this ranking, I'm
Mm-hmm.
arguing for Miami because 9-3, 10-2. And again, I do think recency bias plays into it, where again, you lost on the final week of the regular season. Obviously, you're going to fall. Like,
Yeah,
I wouldn't expect you not to fall. But 9-3, and I think for me, what holds in for Alabama's win, it's not their key wins, it's that one of their wins is Mercer late in the season,
yeah,
but also the committee will pick it again. We all are subjective.
mm-hmm.
I'm subjective. You're subjective. The committee subjective. My issue with this figurehead group of guys who are in those rooms,
Mm-hmm.
if you say you want the best products on the field and the best teams on the field, the record should matter. 9-3, 10-2. Two lost Miami. I know they'll have their problems when they get to playoffs, but at least they played good enough brand of football to, especially on the offensive side, number two offense in the country.
Yeah,
So at least on the offensive side, you played the best brand of football ever, week to week. No matter how close the score is, your offense is by far the best.
yeah,
And yet, when it comes to Alabama, now all of a sudden we go, well, here's their wins against the top 25s.
yeah,
I remember literally we laughed at this. And when I had Allie and I had Steve on and BT on, we laughed at the idea that Texas' best win that the committee cited was what? Vanderbilt and
Vanderbilt. Yeah,
Arkansas.
yeah,
Vanderbilt and Arkansas. So
yeah,
in those moments, you laugh at that when it comes to Texas. But when it comes to Alabama, now it's an important stat.
Yeah.
Now it matters when you have to make your case against Miami. And again, I'm okay if Miami was at 12. You know what team I would have put in before them?
What's that?
Ole Miss. I would have had Ole Miss go in. I would have had South Carolina go in. But then they say, oh, now head to head matters. Alabama beat both of those teams. Alabama played those teams very well. Because what South Carolina lost to Ole Miss in a very handy schedule, but Ole Miss didn't play Ole Miss didn't play Alabama.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what are we doing here?
Yeah. And I think like to kind of piggyback on that too, it's just like the SEC playing 7 games. I think that has to change too. Like, and I guess that's why I'm not feeling too remorseful for Alabama. And at the same time,
Oh, they
Miami
play
too.
8, excuse me.
Yeah, they do play it.
So they do play 8, but
Okay,
everybody
okay,
else
okay.
played more than them. Like that's why they had the extra. So almost every conference has like 9, and here they are with 8. So excuse
Yeah,
me earlier.
no, no, you're good. I'm still. You have a super conference with all these teams. You're talking about you're the best conference. Play 9 games. Play 9 games. Like to your point, like there's no reason Alabama should be playing Mercer 2 weeks before the season's over. That's not. That's not. But to the same token, Miami too. I think if you tell Miami going into that Syracuse game, winning you're in, like win the ball game, Miami.
That is very true. I am not arguing that point. That was like I said, my Hurricane fandom aside,
Mm-hmm.
you lost that game. You don't deserve to be in the conference championship. But what you do deserve, based off how the committee has showed Miami, even after their loss to Georgia Tech, still had them as the presumable ACC champion.
Yeah.
That's where I have an issue with. Where like you were presumable ACC champion all year, all year. Not saying you were but you were the presumable ACC champion.
Mm-hmm.
You fall from being a presumable ACC champion to not even being mentioned for or being the quote unquote first two out. That's where my issue lies. If you, especially when it comes to putting in Alabama, because we all saw the games, we all watched. Alabama, I don't think is a playoff team this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think South Carolina is because guess who they beat that's playing in the conference championship game? Clemson. They beat what could be the ACC champion.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have put way more respect on that win. And guess what? It was a top 25 win. Oh my gosh, shocker. Like, you get where I'm going at it with that? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is why we enjoy it because it's like so many scenarios and outcomes with it. Let me ask you this. Do you think, can you see a scenario where SMU loses and then Miami becomes like, I guess Miami takes their spot as like the second ACC team for like a
no. And
for at large bid.
no, because I think SMU should be awarded for playing in that game, win or lose.
Mm-hmm.
I think they should solidify their spot. I think it's unfair that we already had this thought process going into it when we talked about this off air, behind the scenes, even on this show, where we were like, damn, it really seems like the Big Ten or the ACC would get screwed out of this because of how their conference championship game will get played for a conference where or a team where if you're like third or fourth, but your record looks 9-3 ish, and you're just right there on that bubble, or you're somewhere in that 8 through 11 range, you're safe. I think that's very unfair. So for SMU, I it's almost like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't type of thing. Where again, this all could be a null and void point where if they win, Alabama holds on to that spot, Clemson's not in. It may open the door for somebody else in other conference championship games. But I do think SMU gets the raw in because you're undefeated in conference play. It's your first year in the ACC,
Yeah.
and they were winning by double digit margins. Their
Yes.
only loss is to what would have been
BYU.
at the time BYU, and we always emphasize how that game impacts SMU where they didn't have their starting quarterback. Remember, SMU made a quarterback change after that week, and they've been on a roll ever since then.
Yeah.
So you're telling me, or what Ward Manuel and the College Football Playoff Committee is telling us, because he said it himself too. He said those spots are pretty much locked. If you're not in the conference championship game, those are pretty much locked. So you're telling me you aren't even going to take a chance to relook at these resumes again to go, this team might be better than that team. Let's
Yeah.
bump them. Where we mocked Penn State. That's all. I'm using that as a segue because I do want to talk about the Big Ten championship because this is championship weekend, obviously. So I do want to get your thoughts in this Big Ten championship, right? Obviously, we know Oregon's in undefeated. Worst case scenario, you lose and you host the playoff game. Woo. Penn State, on the other hand, do they have more to lose in this? Even though they're at 3, I know it seems like it's virtually a lock, but do you think they still? I'm not saying they'll fall out the playoffs, but do you think they're in danger of losing a home playoff spot if they lose?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Penn State too, because I I don't know. Penn State hasn't shown they've shown me good ball against like the Washingtons and the Iowas, but then they go up against Ohio State and that offense looks so stagnant. Like Penn State versus SMU. Do you think you can give that clearly to Penn State at all? So how come and
Mm.
I'm going with you too, how come Penn State can lose and still be a lock in, but we can't give that same grace to SMU, you know? So I want to
Ask
say that
Ward
first.
Manuel. Ask the
Yeah.
Michigan 5-year extension AD, Ward Manuel.
And I think that's funny too, because he said something on the line. Oh, I got the article right here. Um, there's still room for movement, but committee chairman Ward Manuel said teams that aren't playing this week aren't expected to shift. And then says that
What does
same
that
thing about
mean?
and then says that same thing about SMU. So it's kind of like if it's I understand it's subjective, but let's just make it clear that it is subjective and certain teams are have I don't think they want to say it, but it's clear when you say things like that and then backtrack for teams like SMU, it's clear that you're looking at certain teams in a different light, which is fine. But
Notre
I don't
Dame's
know.
not a mover.
Yeah.
They don't have a conference championship game being independent. So
Mm-hmm.
they're number 5. It's like, congratulations, you're in. And
Yeah.
we all saw the NIU loss. It didn't bother them as much because they turned it around cool. Not mad at that when you look at it now in hindsight. When them rankings first dropped, me and you were on this show. I emphasized like that should have meant way more than what it did.
Mm-hmm.
But you make up for it. Cool. You've earned it. But I do think it is unfair. Like you said, teams aren't really going to make a shift. However, you can shift,
Yeah.
but you're not supposed. Like, what does that mean? And I want them to be subjective. Do you think it hurts Indiana? Do you think like that Big Ten? Because how is Indiana sitting at 9? Does it feel like Indiana's safe not playing in the conference championship game?
Um, I like theoretically, yes, I think they are safe. And I think when he made that comment, teams that aren't like, I think that it sounded like or it felt like that's what the team he specifically had in mind is Indiana. Um, because if Penn State loses, can they? And then Ohio State's there in the mix too. Like, how does that affect them or not? Yeah, I think that Indiana is safe, and I guess we talked about this before with our first episode when it aired. It's just these ACC schools again, and it feels like there's just not a lot of respect being built on them. But I say this again, like if Miami plays Penn State, can we guarantee Penn State, like based off what we've seen, can we guarantee Penn State's going to get that win? No. Can we do that same thing for SMU? No. But it seems like no matter what happens this weekend, Penn State's in. But a one
It
loss,
does.
but a one loss SMU, and I get it. Their losses to BYU, Penn State's losses to Ohio State. But if we turn on those
BYU was
games,
ranked at the time.
yes, and I think BYU is a good team, and we've seen Ohio State took a loss to a Michigan team that their offense is
And how was
non-existent.
that
They
not
even have a
lost very
quarterback.
impactful?
Yeah, yeah,
Like it's all again the subjectivity. I'm not like I said, I'm with you. I wouldn't be mad at the subjectivity if we were honest about it
yeah.
because even then, Ohio State was what, 3-4? I want to say there were three last week, and then they lost to Michigan, and then
Mhm.
they dropped to 6. Please correct me if I'm wrong here. It's just I want clear subjectivity. Just make it clear and make it concise. I wouldn't be mad at you. Oh, they were 2 last week.
Yeah, I
So
was gonna
from
say I think
2
there were two.
to 6, you
Hmm.
drop 4 spots.
Hmm.
Miami loses, they drop 6 spots.
Hmm.
Both lost to unranked teams, but
Hmm.
Miami lost to a team that was bowl eligible.
Yeah, I
Michigan
think.
won that game to get bowl eligible.
Yeah, I think, and this is why I can understand kind of the Miami slander is because Miami has played like well before Miami lost to Georgia Tech. Everyone
Everything's
was
close.
saying, yeah, everyone was saying like Miami's playing around with their food. Miami's playing around with their food. Like, come on, get it together, get it together. So it felt like the committee was kind of just waiting for that loss. Um,
And that's the problem that I think I would have is
mhm,
because again, I'm not saying you know the committee personally. I know
mhm.
you work with the Big Ten, so you know Ward Manuel, Mr. Big Money Bucks over there. But
Getting
but
that extension too. It sounds like
yeah, like
this
I
extension
think
coming soon.
it's weird because again, like you said, everyone said it. Miami's playing with their food. They're playing with their food, which means we're all waiting for you to lose. Where
Mhm,
Ohio State, I feel like that loss should be a little bit weighed heavier because you're not expected on them to win, especially you were a 3 touchdown favorite. But I, neither here nor there. It's just again the difference in falling.
mhm,
Again, both teams fell. Don't care how it shaked out.
mhm.
Don't care when you talk about Miami and Ohio State. What I would like I said, what I've always stood on the horse was 10-2, 9-3.
Yeah.
Not 10-2 versus 10-2. Obviously, I would go with Ohio State. Like that's the simple choice in the
Mhm,
math. I want to take that math and transition it to the SEC. Texas plays Georgia. Georgia seems like they're locking at 5, but that would be their third loss. Ward Manuel again talked about he'll weigh the games a little. You're somewhat rewarded for your conference game. Do you think this means a little bit differently? Do you think like they'll kind of just is Georgia super safe no matter how it looks? Blown out by 10, blown out by 30, win by 1. Is Georgia does it seem like the SEC conference game? I'm gonna really ask this. I'm gonna get
mhm.
really in does the SEC conference game the only game where it feels like no matter what the outcome is, both teams one gets a bye, one gets a home field advantage.
Yeah.
Is that what it feels like? Because it seems like as this season went on, Georgia with their 2 losses, like, Carson
Mhm.
Beck's still playing good, even though he's
Yeah.
throwing receptions.
Three
And
interceptions a
now we're
game.
here.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's like now we finally get the rematch we all wanted from the regular season. If Georgia loses,
Mhm.
does it feel like nothing changed? Do they just stay at 5?
Um, yeah. See, I really don't know. And I believe that like if Georgia gets like boat race, I think that we should look at that the same way like if SMU gets boat race. The only difference is Georgia has
You
a
know,
win
Greg
over
Sankey
Texas.
ain't going to allow that. Greg
Yeah,
Sankey is not going to allow that.
that I mean the SEC as a whole, we would never hear the end of it. But also Georgia has a win over Texas. But I am of the belief like if you get in that conference championship game and you're like a Georgia team where you have 2 losses and the last team out has three or something like that, and you get boat race, get to the back of the line, pal. Like next team up. The only reason I think Georgia is having that saving grace is because they beat Texas.
Clemson. I will
Yeah,
say because they beat Clemson.
Clemson and Texas already. Now, if Texas gets in there and gets boat raced by Georgia, that's an interesting thing. That would be an interesting scenario. I wonder how the committee would look at that. Because we talked about it. That Texas A&M win was nice, but outside of that, it's like before that we were like, what is this Texas team really? We got to that Georgia game and they just couldn't show up, or they didn't show up. And now we're looking at Texas like, okay, they're winning, but who are they playing again? They got to the Texas A&M game. They played decent. They played well, and got nothing spectacular, but played well. But if they get to that championship game and get boat raced and lose to it for a second time to Georgia, how do we view that as a committee or as the committee? Where do they fall? I think that would be interesting because I keep bringing SMU's name up
because
because
they're the only one who's threatened to fall.
yeah, and I feel like they have a similar. As I talk about these teams, I feel like they have similar situations to all of them. And seeing them play and seeing some of these Big Ten teams play, and SEC teams play, I think SMU has a shot with all of them. Like SMU is a good team.
The only
Um,
team that I think SMU falls from grace against is Oregon.
mhm,
That's literally it because that's the only perfect team
yeah,
based off the resume, based off what the committee has told us. Oregon is the only perfect team. Other than that, SMU has a chance to win against anybody in that ranking right now.
and then Oregon, they have a good win over Ohio State. It's like I think they got that win, and everyone just likes. This is the we were talking about this week on Big Ten. This is the most untalked about like undefeated team. So I think that Big Ten championship will show us a lot too, because for all intents and purposes, Ohio State handled Penn State. Will Howard turned the ball over a couple of times, so the score looked a lot closer than that game actually was. But Penn State's offense didn't score. So
Mm-hmm.
and we just saw Ohio State lose to Michigan, so we know that Ohio State can fall short. So how good is this Oregon team? You know what I mean? And I think
I
this
I'm,
would be
I'm
a
with
good
you.
that this would be a good eye test to see. Like, all right, we know Penn State is decent. They're kind of
They
good.
can hang in there.
Yeah. So that'd be nice. That'd be interesting to see too. It's
It's
a lot
definitely
that's
a
at
lot.
stake this week.
One conference that we have not talked about, I want to just give quick conversation because we're running out of time. Quick conversation to the Big 12. How impressive has Kenny Dillingham been with Arizona State, a team that was picked 16th in the conference,
Yeah.
to now be in the conference championship game against Iowa State? Like, how is this season an overachievement? And like, where does where matter of fact, I'm gonna scrap the question. I'm gonna rank it just like this.
Mm.
Of teams in new conferences, teams that are in conference championships, out of those that are in those bubbles, which one is the most impressive? Oregon, SMU, Arizona State. Who is the most impressive?
Hmm. I think I'm gonna sound like an SMU homer, but yeah, SMU. But I would put Arizona State like closely behind
The
them.
walk-ons of the ACC paid their way in, and now look at them.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like there are certain times in the year, like in the beginning of the year, even myself, I was like, oh, the SEC just seems like I won't say a better conference, but
You said
it's
better.
deeper.
We
It's
we've
deeper.
had this conversation, and I stood 10 toes.
Yeah,
ACC is very comparable and equal this year to the
yeah.
SEC.
I won't take it that far, but I would say that
I'm doing it.
I think Miami can hang in there with most of those teams. They don't have a defense, but Cam
When you
Ward
got
is
Cam Ward, you could
yeah,
do it.
exactly. Cam Ward's
Like
fantastic. He's like probably one of the most exciting players in in college football right now.
third on
So
Heisman, most likely.
yeah, so I think that Miami can hang around there with pretty much anyone, but that defense, I mean, we see it with some of these close games that they're pulling out against inferior teams. And some of that is coaching too. Mario Cristobal needs to be held accountable for some of his late game and play calling antics. Um, but yeah, I think that with all that being said, I think that we came into this season with before we even saw a snap, the SEC and the Big Ten had a head up on everybody, and we're kind of seeing that play out as the playoffs come around. And as I
Everybody's
change,
gettable.
as I change my opinion, I'm like, oh, this Miami team is good. Oh, this SMU team is good. The ACC should get. I mean, the way things are playing out, the ACC should get two teams in. I think that that's more than fair. And
And
then
at
to
one point
see,
we argued three, AMAC. At
yeah,
one point we argued three.
100%, 100% with SMU, Miami, and then if Clemson continued to play well, Clemson took a bad loss to Louisville. That kind of changed my mind, but yeah, Clemson continued to play well. I thought that they could see their way in too, but yeah, it's just it's kind of crazy that Alabama is being talked about as
Look where we
jumping.
are now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Whew. AMAC, final 40 seconds. I don't even know why I tried to ask another question. We don't have enough time. That's something we could do next for a whole nother thing.
Mhm.
Tell people where they can find you at on social media, what projects you like to work on, or what else you got going on, man. The floor is yours right here. Tell them what they need to know.
Well, first and foremost, you can catch me and Darius' show Saturday on College Sports Radio, Channel 84. College Game Day Tailgate. We have Chris Plank and Bobby Carpenter hosting that one. We have a blast. Um, Monday through Friday, you can check out our show on Big Ten Radio. Big Ten this morning, and Darius is on Dusty and Danny in the morning. And you can follow me on all social media at Anthony McBarnette for Instagram, and then Ant Major, I think, is my Twitter. Yeah, always a great time talking to you. Hopefully, we don't get too disappointed by anything that happens this weekend,
I'm
but
already disappointed.
yeah, I know, right?
10-2. That's literally my only
Yeah, I
argument
know that
there.
hurts.
Is
That
literally
hurts you.
it's not, oh, Miami deserves to be in there. I would argue this even if it was a 10-2 Colorado.
Yeah, it's just the
10-2,
Alabama. Yeah, it's just the
9-3.
Alabama. Yeah.
Simple math. One has one more loss,
Mhm.
one has one more win. I don't care who it was against, just win, baby. Al Davis has preached that into our skulls as diehard football lovers. But now all of a sudden it's just win, but with a caveat, with a little bit of flair, a little bit of stakes.
Mm. It's funny because I feel like we had this conversation last year. It's like Alabama always jumping in the ACC team. It's like
Florida
hopefully
State
next year.
doesn't have
Yeah,
Jordan Travis, but
yeah,
woo,
yeah.
undefeated team, conference
Yeah,
champion. Uh,
yeah,
I'm getting the headache from this.
yeah. Sorry to bring it back up.
Ladies and gentlemen, AMAC again, thank you for joining.
Thank you for
Uh,
having me, man.
I will try to have this show out again next week. What we do have planned, I do have a NFL draft show starting to ramp up where me and some friends of mine, and it'll probably just be AMAC here because me and him watch a lot of tape in our spare time. So you guys keep a lookout for that. I know our first episode, I said quarterbacks, right?
Yeah, man. Whatever you
Oh,
want to
yeah.
talk about.
We're going to go position through position,
Mhm.
maybe, and we might just skip the interior offensive line because I love group offensive line play and not just a singular guy, maybe tackles. But we'll go through that. Uh, Again, you guys know where to find me at Brockett Media on everything. Until next time, I will see you guys later.